Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove. I'm here today with another book review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the Superman, the Man of Steel, Volume 1 hardcover. So this is the beginning of the John Byrne era of Superman collected in here, which started in 1986 when Superman, as well as basically all of DC, was relaunched and rebooted following on from the Crisis on Infinite Earths event, which was made to simplify what was really an overly convoluted and complex DC universe at that point. But yeah, so this is the early stuff from the John Byrne era where he kind of reimagined Superman and put his own spin on things. And a lot of people, back when this volume was first announced and the subsequent volumes, and as they came out, were quite disappointed, I think, that this material wasn't collected in either maybe a couple of omnibus volumes, or at least for the 4 volumes that there will ultimately be, for them to not be oversized hardcovers, deluxe editions. I understand that. You know, I'm an oversized hardcover collector myself, mainly an omnibus collector, so it would have been cool for these to be in an omnibus. And maybe one day they will be, who knows. But what I will say is, for now at least, I think it's just cool to have them in a hardcover format. And the books themselves, you know, these are presented really well. They look really nice. So it's, you know, I'm going to be grateful to just have them because they look good on the shelf. They look good to kind of read through. They're well presented. Yeah, so happy to just have it for the most part, and we'll see if it ever gets printed in an oversized format, of course. But without any further ado, if we just take a look at the design of the book, I'll show that off a little bit here. So the cover, nice and simple, the iconic cover to the Man of Steel issue number 1. The spine on this first volume, you get this kind of nice blue, pretty simple, quite sleek, nice and clean design. And then on the back, you get your little blurb, little summary, nice image of Superman there. I think that's a Jerry Ordway image. And then you get your contents at the bottom. So in here you're getting the Man of Steel miniseries, issues 1 to 6. So that was the series that actually launched Superman, relaunched Superman, I should say. And then you get the first part of the subsequent Superman issues, Action Comics, and Adventures of Superman. So yeah, if we take a look inside and discuss the material as we go through it. The pages in here are that kind of sort of matte paper. They're not glossy pages. They all have a matte finish, and they kind of feel quite thin, like not too thin, not where it's a problem. But, I mean, you can see here on camera, you can see like through the page a little bit to what's on the reverse side. So, they are quite thin, but it's not really a problem. It's fine to read through. But it kind of feels a little bit like sort of newsprint, which is just a bit unusual because I've come across it before in other books, in other DC books in particular. But you don't see it too often. Far more often than not these days, I think it tends to be glossy pages. But obviously it's personal preference as to whether or not you like this or the glossy pages better. It's not a criticism. At the end of the day, it's not caused me any issues reading through the book. The pages feel sturdy enough. It's just that they are a little bit thin. And then the binding is also fine. Didn't really have any issues with it, but it is glued. So it's glued binding, but because the book isn't too big, it's not really a problem like it would be with a big thick omnibus. But yeah, so it starts off here. This is that first issue, The Man of Steel, and what this is, it's a 6-issue miniseries that basically retells Superman's origin. So in many ways, this is kind of very much become the blueprint for Superman now. I think very often since this run, writers have kind of referred back to what John Byrne established and kept elements of this continuity, but for the most part it's the classic story. So it's Superman's parents, Jor-El, his dad, kind of realizing that Krypton is doomed, managing to send their infant son away to Earth after discovering that it's a suitable planet for him to go and live on, and that the radiation from the yellow sun is going to basically make him the most powerful person on the planet. So that much is obviously standard Superman. It's exactly what you'd expect. And then what I really like, though, as you go through here, I like the take on Clark Kent. So John Byrne kind of reimagined Clark so that he's not a kind of geeky sort of high school loser when you first meet him. He's a member of the football team, he's a popular guy, but he's such a nice guy. You know, when people talk about Superman, so often the biggest criticism is that Superman is boring because he's too nice, he's too powerful, and therefore you can't write interesting stories about him. Well, to an extent I understand the point that's being made there by people who say that, but I'll say right now, as I read through this, it was so refreshing, so genuinely just kind of nice to read a protagonist, in this case Superman, who is just such a kind of down-to-earth nice guy. You know, it's like there's not a bad bone in his body. You know, he is very much the ultimate good guy. No matter what, he's always out to try and help people, always thinking of others before himself, the ultimate kind of selfless hero. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's just because nowadays you read so many stories kind of lean more towards the kind of dark, mature storytelling with flawed protagonists. I don't know, maybe it's just because it's refreshing change to me personally, but I kind of really liked reading Superman in these stories, because it was just cool to be kind of reading a protagonist who you can just kind of 100% get behind, because there's basically no flaws in his character, pretty much, well, his personality anyway. But yeah, so you get all the kind of standard stuff. There's a really good origin story, and I will say, you know, I'd never read this before prior to getting this book and reading it in here. In fact, I hadn't read a whole lot of Superman in general, to be honest, but reading through this is a really good splash image here, love that. That's when he first gets his costume and he flies off for the first time. But yeah, so he starts to gain his powers. His parents are very much the providers of his moral compass, because they've raised him to be, they've raised him right, basically. They raised him well. Yeah, so he puts together his costume, he reveals himself to the world. Initially, he's kind of trying to save people in secret and not be spotted, but then he makes his grand first public appearance as Superman. And yeah, so he goes off to Metropolis, and it's all the standard stuff that you pretty much probably know about Superman, whether you've read this or an origin story or not. You know, he goes to Metropolis, gets a job at the Daily Planet, meets Lois Lane. At the same time, he's, living a dual life as Superman. And yeah, so it's really cool as well to see his power kind of shown off and emphasised in these early stories when he's making his first appearances and the world isn't fully aware of who he is yet. So he's kind of showing up here and stopping a robbery, and all these people just trying to open fire on him, and obviously the bullets just bouncing right off. And his speed and strength just kind of on full show as he just takes out these ordinary goons. It's kind of, for me, it was exactly what I wanted to see in a Superman story, because at the end of the day, people might say he's too powerful, but it's because he's that powerful, for me anyway, you want to see that power utilised. You want to see stories where this guy who's unbelievably fast, strong, borderline invincible, should be able to just easily dispatch most threats that come his way. So it is nice to kind of see that he does that. And then obviously later on, we're going to get the introduction of kryptonite, which is always the key thing that's used to kind of bring Superman down so that people have a chance of fighting him. But anyway, for the most part, it's cool to just see him kind of in full force, effectively, as a force for good. But there's this cool tension as well. So Clark Kent, obviously unbeknownst to everybody else, because he is himself Superman, he's able to get all the best news stories about Superman. He gets the scoop ahead of other reporters, and most prominently ahead of Lois Lane. So she's kind of annoyed at Clark. She sort of resents him a little bit. She doesn't know why he's always able to get the best Superman stories. But this is a really cool issue, actually. So this is the first time that Superman and Batman are shown to meet in this post-crisis continuity. And basically it's your standard thing with Batman prowling the night, trying to get some criminals to talk and reveal, the whereabouts of a particular criminal he's after. Superman comes in because to him Batman's just a vigilante who should be stopped because he's acting outside the law. Batman kind of persuades him to go along with him for a little bit. So they end up having, in a way, their first team up, really, in this continuity anyway. and you've always got to say within this continuity with DC, because at this point there's been so many hard reboots, soft reboots, retcons, you know, in DC in particular, that I feel Superman and Batman have met for the first time probably about 15 times at least throughout the history. Yeah, then you get obviously another big introduction with Lex Luthor coming into the story. And yeah, so Byrne reimagined Lex Luthor as to be, because prior to Crisis on Infinite Earths, Lex Luthor, if I can speak, had been more of a kind of typical sort of mad scientist sort of villain. What Byrne did as of this point onwards was kind of re-establish Luthor as more of a kind of powerful businessman, you know, kind of multi-billionaire. Yeah, so like less of a scientist, more of just a cruel, hard businessman who's absolutely got no kind of sympathy for anybody who he wants to step on to further his own advancement in whatever way he wants that to be. And then Superman, of course, becomes the focus of his efforts, of his anger. So it becomes all about trying to use his wealth, influence, power in whatever ways he can to bring Superman down. I think that's my biggest criticism of this run from what I've read so far, not just in this book, but the subsequent volumes, is just the over-reliance on Lex Luthor as the villain. And I think, in general, Superman is one of those characters who kind of lacks kind of a wide variety of great villains. So Lex Luthor is obviously a good villain, an iconic villain, but it's, you know, whenever any one villain is overused too much, you just kind of get a little bit bored of them, and that was my only real criticism. And it's not a huge criticism, because I wasn't literally fed up. I wasn't completely done with it or anything. It's just that he was showing up a little bit too often, and I kind of wished there'd be a little bit more variety. But for the most part, as I say, I had a whole lot of fun reading this, and I definitely recommend picking up this volume as a cool kind of starting point, as an introductory point to reading Superman, even though this particular continuity has since been wiped out as well. But what are you going to do? It doesn't stop it from being a good story if you just read it within the context of its time. And yes, you know, by the end of that miniseries, which is here, just before you launch into Superman #1, you've got basically a fully established Superman here now. You know, he's been around for a while as Superman. You kind of understand what the Superman of this era is all about. And off you go. And generally what I will say that I have noticed as a pattern is that the issues of Superman itself, the series Superman, which is being written and drawn by John Byrne, and then you've got Action Comics, which is also being written and drawn by Byrne, and then you've got Adventures of Superman, which was by Marv Wolfman and Jerry Ordway. So that was the only one that Byrne wasn't directly working on. But the three of them are really kind of distinctly different. So I found that the issues of Superman were kind of the more serious issues, where the story of, you know, overall Superman story would kind of progress the most in those issues. Then the issues of Action Comics are really kind of weird, because they feel like Silver Age stories. Like they're almost at odds with the kind of storytelling that Byrne was doing in Superman, where, and you know, what he'd established in Man of Steel and then in Superman in that first issue is quite, for the most part, a grounded, realistic, insofar as Superman can be realistic, version of the character. But then in this first issue of Action Comics, I was really taken aback, because you get this weird story where somebody has just managed to literally swap minds with Superman. So some random villain has used some random machine to swap his brain into Superman, so that you get Superman being controlled by the mind of some evil guy, and Superman's mind is trapped in some random villain's body somewhere. And that's a story straight out of the 50s or the 60s, honestly. It's weird. And it's not the only example. Basically every issue of Action Comics is a story like that. Now, it's not, again, not a bad thing, really. I'm all for wacky stories now and then, and I do enjoy Silver Age stories, so it wasn't a deal breaker for me at all, but it was a really odd transition to go between the issues of Superman and then Action Comics with these really distinctly different kind of stories going on. Yeah, so that was something that was very odd for me, very unexpected. But then you get back to another issue of Superman, and again the story is much more serious. So you've got Superman trying to use all of his resources to find out who Superman is, which is more in line with what you would expect to be going on within this story. And in the end, he does find out that Superman is Clark Kent, however he refuses to believe it. So he thinks that there's been an error, because it's not possible that somebody so ordinary like Clark Kent could possibly be Superman. So that was pretty cool. The issues of Adventures of Superman then, so these ones by Wolfman and Ordway, they are fine. I don't know, they're kind of just okay. They're sort of like, they don't have that kind of odd silliness of the Action Comics issues, but they don't feel quite as strong as the issues of Superman. It's like they're just, I don't know, they almost feel like supplementary stories. So, you know, not bad at all, but for the most part, they're not the best, you know. They're just those kinds of perfectly fine stories that, you know, they're not bad in any way specifically that you can say, but they're also the ones that you're probably not that likely to remember and think of them as your absolute favourite stories. But you know, for me, like as a, you know, if you've seen some of my previous reviews on books featuring John Byrne's work, you'll know I'm a John Byrne fan. So probably goes without saying that the John Byrne issues were my favourites, given that. This was a cool story. So there's this issue where Superman is basically kind of captured by Darkseid and taken to Apokolips, and he gets kind of caught up in a kind of war going on between the kind of oppressed people who are unfortunate enough to be living under the rule of Darkseid on Apokolips, against Apokolips himself. No, against Darkseid himself, should say. But yeah, pretty interesting story. There is some crossover as well between Superman and the Adventures of Superman series. So those two crossover more. The Action Comics stuff tends to be more kind of self-isolated. But you know, I will just say again, dude, I had a really fun time reading this. It was perfectly new reader friendly. So if that's something that, you know, concerned you maybe, don't worry about that. Yeah, you know, good stuff overall. A fun run. Probably, I would think probably the best starting point really to start reading Superman. Certainly a run that I was happy to have got through. And then in the back you get some of these excerpts from, I think it's called Who's Who, which is like DC's equivalent of what Marvel did with the Marvel Handbook, where they would just do like these sort of encyclopedic entries of different characters, places, history from the, in this case, the DC universe. But yeah, really cool overall. You know, a book that I enjoyed. So I read through this not too long ago. I'm about halfway through volume 2 and enjoying that. So I'll aim to put a review out on that one once I've got through that, and then, you know, ultimately volume 3 as well. But yeah, overall a really cool series. Not some of my absolute favourite stuff. You know, I'm not going to say it was absolutely fantastically great and awesome, but I had a lot of fun reading it. Those weird issues of Action Comics were fun in their own way, kind of odd Silver Age throwbacks. I'm sure it was deliberate by Byrne, but it was a bit odd. And if you're not expecting it, like me, you'd probably be caught off guard by that. But really, that's the only criticism, and I use the word criticism loosely because I don't actually mean it as a particularly negative point, more of an odd surprise, a bit of a jarring change of pace when I got to that issue. But yeah, like I say, good origin story, classic stuff, and I can understand why people like it as much as they do and why people wanted to see it in an omnibus. Fingers crossed maybe we get that omnibus one day. But anyway, as always, thanks for watching this and for sticking with me through this, listening to my thoughts and everything. Hopefully it was enjoyable, useful in some way, informative. That's what I'm going for at the end of the day. And I'll be back again soon and talk about something else. Thanks again, guys.